Hello, and welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center. God is number one in everything, and I hope to honor that in everything that I do in this podcast is no different. Today we're going to be doing a short episode, so I'll do an abbreviated bio and then into our topic of the 44 Mag. Maybe 44 Special also, since they tie in so closely. Your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. I don't apologize for that. It's number one in my life and everything that I do. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, a couple of combat tours in Iraq, urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. After my combat tours, I also went to work for LAPD as a police officer, worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area where our primary job was to stop active shooters. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. MOS in the Marine Corps 0351 Assaultman Infantry. Primary in the Army 11 Bravo Infantry. I've been blessed to do a lot of shooting competitions. I started competing even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've won more shooting competitions than I can remember in both rifle and pistol. I've also competed in other things, shotgun and archery. Been a state rifle and pistol champion a few times over. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Every talent, every discipline I have is a gift from Him, and I hope to remember that. Also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Not many people today can say that they've done that. Also, NRA certified firearms instructor, FBI NRA certified instructor for a lot of years. And right now, I won't say the company that I work for because I haven't gotten their permission and they're not affiliated with the podcast. But let's just say I manage a firearms company and training company in Arizona. With that, guys, enough about the bio. Let's roll into the topic, the 44 Remington Magnum, or the 44 Magnum, or the 44 Mag, whatever you want to call it. It is a cartridge I think worth talking about. And I kind of have some history with this. My father, who I guess my uncle may have introduced me to guns, but my uncle and my father's brother and my father, really got me into shooting at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with guns. Some of my earliest pictures are of me running around with guns. And the gun that my father had more than anything else was a Ruger Red Hawk or Ruger Super Red Hawk and 44 Remington Magnum. I remember being a young child, probably younger than I should have been, casting hot molten lead bullets for 44 Mag and for other things. But mostly looking at my father's Dillon reloading stuff in the garage and, thinking how cool that was. And my dad, would often have that 44 Rem Mag either on the dinner table or next to him in the truck, or, that was the most common gun that he had on him or around him was the Ruger Red Hawk or Super Red Hawk 44 Rem Mag. So I guess I have some nostalgia for the cartridge. And it's a great cartridge. We're not going to talk a lot about the history of the 44 Rem Mag. I'm sure you could find that on YouTube or something. But the history in and of itself is really cool. A lot of the guys that, kind of laid some of the things that we use today, Elmer Keith and people like that, a lot of those people back in the day were loading hot rounds for their revolvers and pushing the envelope. And the history of it's kind of cool. I'm not going to get super nerdy into it, but they were loading pistol cartridges hotter than you should. And if you've ever hand loaded, you've probably been tempted to do that. I know I certainly have. Kind of push the envelope. And they weren't super scientific, back in the day. Basically, I understand what they did was they would load the round hotter and hotter until the gun blew up, and then they would back it off, and that would kind of be their load. Wouldn't recommend that. I've certainly messed up some guns loading them too hot, but I wouldn't recommend that you do it. Always wear iron ear protection. So anyway, that's kind of what they did. And the reason they loaded up the 44 Special, which turned into the 44 Remington Magnum, was because, as I understand it, it had more steel in between the cylinders, because 44 Magnum is not actually 44 caliber. It's, I believe .429 caliber. So it gives you a little bit more steel in between the cylinders than, say, 45 Long Colt did. So they beefed that up and they loaded it to much higher pressures because you had more steel. And the metallurgy, decades ago was not as strong as it is today. Today you can load, 45 Long Colt if the gun will take it as hot or hotter than 44 Remington Magnum. But back then that wasn't the case. So speaking of cases, they took the 44 Special, they loaded it hotter and hotter and hotter. And when they got it to a point where they thought it was good, they submitted it to, ammo manufacturers. We talked about wildcatting in other episodes. And they got it standardized. And so that you wouldn't put it in a weaker 44 Special that couldn't handle it and blow the gun up, they lengthened it a little bit longer, kind of like they did with the 357 Magnum. Not because they needed room for the powder, but because they wanted you to not be able to chamber it in some older guns. So they did that, and they had the 44 Remington Magnum, and the Remington Magnum was born. And the 44 Remington Magnum, I don't know how popular it was until Dirty Harry came out, but if you're not familiar with that, who doesn't like a good Clint Eastwood movie? He's not as good to me, in my opinion, as John Wayne, but still a pretty cool American icon, I guess. But anyway, if you've ever seen Dirty Harry, he kind of made that cartridge take off. From what I understand, the Smith & Wesson Model 29 wasn't super popular, wasn't a very good seller until that movie came out. And it kind of took off. And that's kind of a weird thing to me because the 44 Remington Magnum, to me, is not a great cartridge for defense. The guns it is chambered in are very large. Larger than most people are going to carry all the time. Maybe if you're going on a woods hike or something like that. But certainly not a CCW weapon. At least not unless you're wearing like a giant overcoat or something. So it's kind of weird that kind of took off. I don't know of any like police departments that issue 44 mag. So weird that kind of made the cartridge take off. But what it is good for is hunting. Hunting large to medium-sized game. Good for, if you're hiking somewhere where you have bigger bears. It's good for that. It's good for hunting deer. It's a great cartridge. It packs a lot of power in a handgun cartridge. I believe the tagline in Dirty Harry was, the most powerful handgun in the world. Well, that was true. It's not true anymore. You have things like the 500 Smith & Wesson, which are more powerful. But how much power do you really need? Pretty much any big game animal in North America has been taken with the 44 Remington Magnum. And if it can take any animal in North America, and probably the world, why bump up to something bigger? Now, you could debate on whether you think this cartridge is better or a hot-loaded 45 Long Colt. I'd say both are good, but the 44 Remington Magnum is good in the fact that if you buy a gun chambered for the 44 Rem Mag, you can pretty much guarantee that, except for some crazy stuff like the buffalo bore, any gun chambered in it can handle it. And it has some pretty impressive ballistics. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I know it might be hard to visualize in, terms of hearing it on audio and not being able to see it. But the 44 Remington Magnum is a powerhouse. Its most common loading is the 240 grain semi-wad cutter is kind of what I think of as the classic, but a 240 grain is kind of the classic loading for the 44 Rem Mag. And that, if memory serves me correct, is going to be somewhere between 12 and 1400 feet a second, which is pretty stout. And that's kind of a standard, not crazy load for the 44 Remington Magnum. So we're talking about that, and that's kind of your standard loading, 1,400 feet a second with a 240 grain bullet. But you can get, like we were talking about, 300 grain at 1250. That's a Carbine load. Well, at least it says it's a Carbine load on Wikipedia. So, 300 grain at 1,200 feet a second. And Buffalo Bore has a plus P plus loading, which, like I said, your Rugers could handle that, your Thompson Centers. I don't know if, a Smith & Wesson Model 29 would, but that's listing a 340 grain bullet at 1,400 plus feet per second. That is crazy powerful. To put that in perspective, 340 grains at 1,400 feet a second, and you're talking your standard 9mm is 115 grain at 11 or 1,200 feet a second. So if you put that in perspective, that's a lot. Your average 9mm load is going to give you somewhere around-ish 400 foot-pounds. That load in the 44 mag is giving you what it says here, 1,500 plus foot-pounds. So 400 to 1,500 plus foot-pounds. And that's a lot of energy. I have hunted a lot with a handgun. I have been blessed to take more animals with a handgun than a lot of people have ever taken or will ever take with a rifle. But I've taken most of mine with, not magnum calibers, with 940 and 45 where it was legal, because I think shot placement is more important. And I do it for the challenge. But 44 Remington Mag is a fantastic handgun hunting cartridge. And that's not even where I think it shines the best. Where I think it shines the best is in a carbine. Now, if you take that cartridge, one of the ones we just talked about, and put it in a carbine, it gives it even more power. You take that and put it in a carbine, and it's a sledgehammer. It's a sledgehammer and a handgun. It only gives you more power in a carbine. And since it's, made for shorter barrels anyway, you get, in a 16-inch barrel, you're getting a lot of extra performance, and even in a short barrel compared to a rifle. And for places where you're going to hunt inside 150 yards, which is pretty much anywhere east of the Mississippi unless you own farmland or, the oddity of an open land, it's a great gun for that. A lever action carbine and 44 mag is a great gun. They do fantastic on deer and deer-sized game or black bear or anything like that. Especially, Remington 44 Rem Mag is pretty expensive if you buy it at the store, but if you reload, especially if you cast your own bullets, it's not super expensive. And you get a lot of recoil in a handgun, and that may or may not appeal to you. But if you put it in even what you'd consider fairly light rifle, say 5 pounds, it doesn't seem to have nearly as much recoil because the gun is heavier. That recoil goes one of two places. It goes into the gun and the gun absorbs some of it, or it goes into you. So the heavier the gun is, the less it has the same amount of recoil, but the less perceived recoil. So it's really not bad in a carbine. So that's where I think it shines the best for a hunting cartridge. Like I said, I've enjoyed many a deer taken with a handgun, more than I can remember, and I really enjoy that. And I've certainly never needed a 44 Rem Mag. but I do it for the challenge. I think if you were going to hunt deer with a 44 Rem Mag, I don't see any better cartridge than the 44 Rem Mag. Certainly the 45 Long Colt will do it. Certainly the 454 Casull is a little bit better and even more powerful than the Rem Mag. But again, how much killing does an animal need? If it's dead, it's dead. And if you didn't kill it with a 44 Mag, you probably weren't going to kill it with a 500 Smith & Wesson, let's be honest. So 44 Rem Mag is kind of in that spot, right neck and neck with the hot-loaded 45 Long Colt. And the fact that I don't know how much more you need in a handgun cartridge. You could argue that it's a better cartridge for hunting than the 357 Magnum, especially for larger animals, elk and things like that, and I would agree. Not that you can't take elk with a 357, many people certainly have, for the challenge in the right ranges, but 44 Mag is definitely better. But I wouldn't say that any cartridge more powerful, the 500 Smith & Wesson, really gives you any advantage, and it gives you a lot of extra cost and a lot of extra recoil, and generally the guns chambered in something like a 500 are giant even compared to the large frame guns of a 44 Rem Mag. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot for hunting large game, for medium to large game with a handgun or in a carbine in a handgun caliber. I think it really does well in that, in that use. Some really cool guns chambered in the 44 Rem Mag. I said growing up that they made the Red Hawk and the Super Red Hawk. Those are kind of the classic. If you want a more elegant lined single action of the old cowboy days, you can get the Ruger Blackhawk, which is their single action version. The Red Hawk's a double action version. They also make the Vaquero if you want the straight like Western look that looks kind of like a Colt Peacemaker but isn't. So you can get that in the 44 Rem Mag. If you're talking about revolvers, we can't gloss over the classic Smith & Wesson Model 29, the kind of probably the gun that has more to credit with making that cartridge popular than anything else. Also, one of my personal favorites is the Smith & Wesson 329 PD. I don't own one, but I may someday just because I go hiking and go out in the wilderness in areas where, large bears, both black and brown bears and mountain lions are around. No grizzly bears in the area I'm at right now, but certainly, other animals, black bears and mountain lions and things like that. And that 329 PD is a pretty cool gun. Probably wouldn't be much fun to shoot very much in 44 Mag, but a really good gun to carry on the trail. Especially if you're going out scouting and you may see something and you may have a legal tag, but your main job was not to put meat on the table. You're mostly going to explore and adventure and have fun, and you wanted a powerful handgun. Another favorite would be the Ruger 7744 or 4477. I don't know how they designate that, but it's their bolt action rifle in a 44 Mag, and that's just cool. I know I mentioned Ruger a lot, but Ruger and the 44 Mag kind of go together. They're kind of known, Ruger's kind of known for chambering a lot of guns in the 44 Mag, and one of the really cool guns they used to chamber and don't anymore was a Deerfield carbine, and that was a semi-automatic carbine, very similar to the Ruger 1022, but chambered in 44 Rem Mag, and that's just freaking cool. I wish they'd bring that gun back, because for brush hunting, for swamp hunting, a cool rotary couple of round mag semi-auto 44 Magnum is pretty cool. So the Deerfield carbine has to get a shout out, even though they're kind of obscure and hard to find. That's a really cool gun. You can still get the bolt action 7744, which would be a great, gun for those enclosed brushy areas, especially for a younger shooter or a new shooter, even heck for an experienced shooter that just wants a nice handy carbine. And of course, the Marlin and Winchester lever action rifles. If you want the classic lever action American hunting rifle, but you don't want it in a 30-30, you want it in a pistol caliber to hold more rounds, to double as a tactical rifle if you live in a state where your right to carry, more modern guns has been stripped away from you, then, a lever action gun in 44 Mag would not be a bad choice. And both Marlin and Winchester have been making those for a long time. And Rossi also makes one, and they make it in stainless steel, which is pretty cool. Rossi, I believe, is I don't know if it's an exact copy, but a very close copy of the Winchester version, which is a nice, light, handy carbine. But I believe they are less expensive, and I believe that they are in stainless steel, and I don't know that Winchester ever made one in stainless steel, or Marlin. I know they made a 30-30 in stainless, but I can't say they've ever made a 44. But Rossi, I believe, still does. So those are all some pretty cool guns chambered in 44 mag. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. If I didn't mention your favorite gun, or you think another cartridge is better, or whatever, leave it in the comments, comment on the podcast, or leave a review and put it in the review. It's even better if you want to help the podcast out. If you want more content, more visual stuff, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. If you want to contact me, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. You can scroll down to Patreon on there and support for the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo nowadays. For as little as $1, you can help support the podcast. So $1 a month is like the bottom tier Patreon. And if you think this content's worth that and you want to help support, I would be honored, because this content is free to put out, but it's not. I should say it's free for you to listen to, but it's not free to produce and put out. It costs money for that. So if you want to help cover some of that cost and help other people get to hear the podcast, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com, and scroll down to Patreon. But either way, if you don't want to give financially, don't worry. Just listen and don't feel guilty about it. But consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review of the podcast. If you like this podcast and you haven't listened to the Alpha Male podcast yet, you might want to go do that. And if you care about the really important stuff, Simple Man Sermons, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. With that, guys, until next time, thanks and have a blessed day.